Okay, I said I'd do the Huniepop 2 review, so here goes. This is my own personal opinion on Huniepop 2. Not just how it relates to the concept that I talked about that I loved in the first game, but my opinion on it as a piece of media, just a review. So the first thing that jumped out at me immediately, long before the game came out, the new characters don't feel anything like the old characters in their fundamental concepts, right? Their basic forms. I mean, other than the secret weirdo joke characters in the first game, what do you have? You have like a down-to-earth, studious, sociable college girl. You have a melancholy university professor, the soft-spoken, just like yoga instructor in the town, the antisocial, awkward young introvert, a porn star, albeit one that just first comes across as like a sexually active middle-aged woman. You later learn that is her occupation, but more or less focus on her as just a person who happens to work in that industry, so forth. They're mostly fairly down-to-earth characters, but as the characters in Huniepop 2 were being announced, it became more and more obvious that this was not the case anymore. You have like very extreme, like slapstick personalities. You have like a country bumpkin stripper who does cocaine and is too stupid to live. You have an obnoxious weeb that shouts out weeb shit all the time and has no social awareness. You have a mustache twirling villain level gold digger who literally only talks about how much she loves gold digging. Every character in this game is so extreme that they'd have been a joke character in the first game, a secret character. Now, it was impossible not to notice that these characters didn't seem like down-to-earth normal people you'd ever meet in real life like the first cast generally did, but I still expected that they'd have, like, at least a similar level of depth and nuance and attention to detail that the original cast had. I figured these were their initial, trope-based impressions, but they'd be recontextualized to come across like people, like what was done with, like, say, Audrey and Jesse in the first game, but I was definitely misguided with that assumption. A great comparison is a very easy one. It's just like Audrey and Lillian. I already described everything to do with Audrey and how her personality doesn't come across like it's being a fucking cartoon. She feels very natural, and her state of being is believable to her characterization once we study it. More than that, even on a surface level, Audrey doesn't come across like she's just being played for laughs. Everything she says has character to it. But Lillian, who has a similar personality in the sequel, it's just the same shit over and over again. Lillian just comes across as like a stereotypical, what you'd see of like a Zoomer brat gag character. Her personality is extreme to the point that you can't take her seriously at all, and you clearly aren't supposed to either. It's a gag that's already overused in the first place. Now, the closest thing to any of these girls seem to have at some attempt at depth or nuance to their personalities is found in the form of Zoe, who just exists as a meta joke, just like the other girl, like, exist as their one-note jokes. Zoe just tells the player one line per character about what underlying personality thing they might have, and this is terrible for a few reasons. It doesn't even come close to the depth that the original cast had, for one. It also breaks the rule that I talked about before, where details pertaining to a character and their nuance, need to not feel fucking random. For instance, Zoe says that Brooke has, like, an anxiety about the prospect of getting old. But you could listen to every single line that Brooke has in the fucking game and not get that impression from her at all. It feels very random. It feels like it has nothing to do with the established character. It's not that it couldn't be a part of the character, but there's nothing for you to really believe this statement or align it with other evidence. It doesn't fit into your ongoing mental image of the character. It's just a weird tangent detail. Any observation you could do on this front would require you, the player, to make shit up about the story and its messages. Like, when I was playing the game with a friend of mine, this is the example I used for how I would go about writing, say, Lillian, based on what is already here. While I was playing, I'd leave hints at, like, Lillian's family background, perhaps her social status, which is currently very up in the air. Lily is, maritally related to, what's her name? The one I always fucking forget the name of, Ashley. And Ashley is probably very wealthy since she travels all the time and is a high-demand model or whatever, so by extension, I'm assuming Lillian's family would also be somewhat wealthy, at least. Did she, perchance, have a bit of silver spooning in her upbringing that might have informed her sense of entitlement, but also applied social pressure on her to conform to some sort of high expectations that she might have pushed back? I would have pushed Lillian's sibling relationships, especially playing off the idea that she has an older, or I forget if it's mentioned, an older or younger brother who is likely, maybe is liked by her parents far more than she is, sort of like Jesse in Breaking Bad. I would play it kind of like that, with his relationship to his parents and his little brother. See, any number of those things with little hints dropped here and there that allow you to put the pieces together yourself, but still clearly leave a trail of hints to a given fucking, like, conclusion and idea of this character, that would make Lynn's behavior feel more natural, especially you don't also have her act and talk this gimmicky and gag-like. You know, it's not like the tone shifts at any point in this game where sometimes her personality is overplayed and extreme, but sometimes it's taken more seriously, and even then, that'd be a harsh compromise, you know, like in a lot of other media. She quite literally just has one joke on endless repeat, a joke that isn't funny the first time you hear it, definitely is not funny the 20th time you hear it, because it's not even an original joke or a clever joke to begin with. Another thing that struck me right away when playing this game, the dialogue. Within literally 3 minutes of starting the game, I was really excited and optimistic when I started. I thought it was going to be great, but this was pretty much my most anticipated game I knew that was releasing this year, save for Silksong, which I don't know when the fuck that's releasing, the new Hollow Knight, so I probably won't be this year anymore. I was watching the scenes and I thought to myself, wait a minute, I know I'm excited and all for this game to be really good, but isn't this dialogue really bad? Why is this dialogue so much worse than the original?
I have a crazy early flight tomorrow. My boss is sending me out to some island for an exotic shoot. Then I'm supposed to meet up with this tele-Uber chick for a cross promo we've been planning. It's not easy being a world-class fashion model, you know?
Yeah, like it's just like weird exposition dialogue, like it's fucking unnatural speech, like it's going out of their way to, and the delivery is weird and the fucking...
Later, sweet cheeks. Keep that thing nice and hard for me for when I get back.
This is fucking terrible dialogue. And line delivery.
Well,
it's hard to
well,
say, like, which is worse between the line delivery and the dialogue, but... Bad dialogue is something that, once you become, like, attuned to listening for it, it becomes unbearable. You know, like that, like, shing sound effect that plays in the Souls games when you kill an enemy? And that's how, like, your sound effect that you pick up so you know that you can stop swinging at them. You don't have to look at the health bar. Once you get used to hearing it, you can pick it out even amongst all the other sound effects going on. It's a bit like that, you know, like, I can't unhear bad dialogue anymore. It's like I was saying, where you appreciate good dialogue with a lot of nuance to it a lot more once you become attuned to hearing it. The same works in reverse. My tolerance for cringy dialogue is at like an all-time low, and this game has so much of it. Lines that are painfully on the nose to slap you in the face with some stupidly obvious joke or character trait, a complete lack of subtlety. It's everywhere here. The game just, as a whole, also lacks a lot of the strengths that I talked about from the original. Like, this doesn't really work as natural characterization because this setting is just a vacation, a weirdly infinite vacation, but this is all it is. It doesn't strike the same tone anymore. You don't see these people in their daily lives, their normal routines, anything even remotely similar, how a relationship would fit into their daily lives. And beyond that, I mean, like, it's kind of a moot point. The characters are all inherently, like, share the homogeny of the pure fact that they all have to be characters that are okay with double dating and sleeping around and shit like that. Every character feels more similar than they do different. And that is most apparent when you're completing the initial dates with each pairing as the game keeps going, because every last one goes the exact same way. the two girls who've barely spoken to each other as far as you, the player, can see, because any development in their attitude toward one another just happens during the date, quote-unquote, which is just the puzzle gameplay. Then the two girls, just regardless of who they are or what their personality is, they all just say some sexually charged innuendo aimed at the other girl, and that is it. End of scene, same scene for literally every pairing, over and over and over again. There are like 2 or 3 maybe pairings in the whole game that feel like their interactions and chemistry aren't like identical to the every other pairing. They all feel like they have the exact same personality and worldview way too often. You know, like every character is a wannabe porn star on a set with corny, bad dialogue and all, and unnatural behavior toward relationships that is clearly just aimed at having as much excuses as possible to have, like, porn-esque innuendo propositions. This isn't just a disappointment for characterization. This feeds into the game feeling really fucking boring. As you keep going, you keep chugging through the gameplay just to get to the next cookie-cutter interactions between the next pair that feels identical to all the other pairings, or otherwise getting tiny bits of individual characterization from the questions you can ask each girl, but these also have a bunch of problems. Most chiefly, almost every question you can ask a girl either produces a response that is basically the exact same as other responses, like Brooke is pretty much only going to answer any question with something akin to, I love money, and my husband doesn't satisfy me, and that's like the whole character. But beyond that, well, here, let me break it down how this hurts the game in many different ways, including the breakdown of how much time you spend doing one thing as opposed to another. As many people I've seen have said in their reviews of this game, talking to the girls feels counterproductive because of how the resources are distributed in this game now. In the first game, talking gave you XP, and dates would give you money. In this game, there is no money. Everything gives you the fucking fruit things that you can spend to get upgrades or whatever. So, you can either talk and get next to nothing and waste your stamina, which now uses stamina even before the date starts, or you can just do the date and get way more XP for your time. But mainly, talking just doesn't produce much good content. You get fewer options to talk. Like in the first game, you could talk like 3 times in a row and then still do a date. In this one, you get 2 talks and then they're out of stamina. Any question you could ask them can't be very unique because it has to be something that might be shared with the other girl. Beyond that, they just seem like random details without a lot else to go on to flesh out the character, even subtextually. I don't dislike getting small, pointless details about a character, but the fact that you don't get anything that might actually change your perception of each character makes it kinda whack. Beyond that, it's annoying as shit to even try to find the lines at all. See, when I finished the game the first time, I felt like my initial perception of each character was either completely unchanged from the start, or just like the same but worse. Because now I knew how repetitive and annoying they are, and how I originally expected them to have more going under the hood and they'd feel more like humans. Even the most normal characters in this game still don't feel human or like worth talking to. Nora, who is probably the most normal, whose lines and weird changes in attitude feel forced and awkward all the time. The dialogue isn't very interesting. But backing up a bit, yeah. I wanted to get more optional dialogue so I could see if I was missing important details in subtext once I beat it the first time, but even that is a pain in the ass. You get fewer talk options each time you visit a girl due to the changes in the stamina system, like I said. You won't necessarily get the chance to ask them anything new and get new dialogue because it'll be based on what they have in common with the other girl they're randomly next to, which you can't control. You have to go into the menu and memorize what you have and haven't asked a girl each time to avoid getting repeat dialogue by clicking this. And that's hard to do because those things you haven't asked them yet in the menu are hidden for some reason. I don't even know why. They're blacked out until you get them. So I'd have to cross-reference the other girls' menus listing their traits and details to fucking figure out, look at which lines I was missing for each other character that weren't on the list, because they're not just listed there. I'd sometimes go 4 or 5 full cycles of rotating back to the same character with a refresh stamina bar just to get one single new piece of dialogue from her, and even then, I don't even know which dialogue I haven't gotten sometimes. Because let's say girl A likes toast, and girl B, who's right next to her, likes toast. If you ask girl A, and she says she likes toast next to girl B, girl A will give you her dialogue, her unique line about her liking toast, and why. But girl B will simply give you a generic, "Oh, I agree with that," line after girl A says her line. However, in the menu, both of their menus will fill in the detail of the fact that they like toast. So even in the menu, you have yet to hear Girl B's dialogue on this subject, but it'll still tell you that you already got this fact about her. So unless you personally memorize or document for yourself what dialogue you have or have not chosen for each character, you can't use even the menu as a reliable source to let you know what dialogue you might have missed along the way. Now, this isn't a big deal in this game since I've seen all the dialogue now thanks to very helpful YouTubers. And not really much of value seems to be missed. If you don't get all of it, it's still mostly worthless, since I still can't make a compelling character out of all the details that we get in total once you hear all the lines, but as a system, it's still pretty fucking cringe, bro. So, now that I've established some shit, I need to take a step back and mention that nuanced character writing isn't the only appeal this game could have strived for. I started my other video talking about cartoons, and by extension, I'd say that these characters are much more cartoonish. They are extreme, their personalities are played for laughs more than for informing people about their complex states of being. They aren't particularly subtle about anything. This isn't inherently bad, okay? The game is allowed to go for something different from the original game. I personally don't think it's a great idea to drastically shift your strengths when you're making a sequel to something, because people are generally attracted to the concept of a sequel because they like the strengths of the original. But that's ultimately the choice of the creator, and it's not even like the majority of fans of the original loved it for the same reasons that I might have, so the intention is not the problematic part of this. The issue is, these characters are all played for comedy, but their comedy sucks ass. The jokes aren't funny. Q is funny. Okay, I love Q in this game still, mostly, but most of the character gags are bleh. They turned all the characters into jokes, but the jokes aren't amusing. You won't remember these jokes a year from now. They aren't clever, they don't have good delivery, or like chaotic charm to them. They mostly feel like very on-the-nose, simplistic-ass jokes, most of which you probably heard before in other media, done with more wit and better delivery. They just keep repeating over and over and over. Like, the material of this game just naturally lends itself to becoming tiresome and boring as it continues. I put unspeakable amounts of hours into Huniepop 1, and I had to force myself to finish Huniepop 2 and push through the boredom the first time through. Part of that first experience was based on expectation. I kept working to achieve some sort of satisfying character writing in the game, but I mean, on my second playthrough, I played the game on hard and just played for the gameplay, the puzzles, and I liked it better. I guess now is a good time to talk about the couple of things I do like and think work in some way in this game. My favorite characters in this are probably Jessie, Suki, and Polly. Suki is actually chaotic. I know she's unpopular, but Suki is actually chaotic, so some of her lines actually surprised and amused me. Like that one where she just burps really loud for no reason all of a sudden, and there's some other really great ones. Now, Polly is definitely at the bottom of that list because of the issues in the writing that I already brought up. Polly was my favorite going into the game, other than Jessie and Lola, who I already loved from the first game, but because Polly seemed unique. Like, she could potentially have a lot going on in the characterization, and she had, a charming novelty to, like, the character concept, you know? And just without necessarily being totally off the walls unrealistic like most of the characters. She could still be a down-to-earth, relatable person, unlike, say, obviously, like Candace, who is just dumb girl who does drugs. Nora was on my radar, but like I said, I think any personality she has is on the nose in this game and way too simplistic and overbearing. She's kind of boring. But back to Polly. She's the perfect example of what's wrong with all the parts that force all the characters to behave exactly the same as each other. Polly is a mix between having very strong liberal beliefs and having strong conservative values. She's a trans social media influencer, cosmetics artist on fucking YouTube whose aesthetic and ideal way of life revolves around being a classical housewife in a classical, like, picturesque married family dynamic. Out of every character in the game, she has the most reason to not sleep around with random people she just met. She wants a completely faithful husband, her one and only, who and she confirms this multiple times through dialogue. She doesn't like cheating or anything like that. She's, like, extremely proper. Yet Polly also just sleeps with everyone she sees all the time. She knows the MC sleeps with dozens of other girls, but she doesn't seem to care, even though, for you to appeal to what she likes while you're answering her questions, you have to answer according to what a completely faithful, conservative husband would say. That you want a family, that cheating is unacceptable, that, you know, prim and proper, whatever. As far as I know, this is never addressed at all. The contradiction between Polly's established values and the actual events of the game are never addressed. This leaves me with a character who I like the idea of, but I can't actually feel like I look at the character and I get anything, you know? Because the things that she does and how she responds to events doesn't fit what I supposedly know about her as a person. I do not have a clear mental image of her life experiences and how they might have formed her and how she might act in other situations like I do with the cast of the first game. As for the other two characters I like, between Jessie and Suki, they're pretty much for opposite reasons. I think Suki is the only character, other than Q, that got me to laugh in the whole game at any point. Suki has, in my opinion, the most charming comedy of the cast. Her fucking like, this might be a weird way of saying this, but I felt like most of the characters in this game were, like, one-note gags. They're just, like, simple gags that already exist. Like, for example, Lillian is just an overused gag you've heard a million times before about the fucking, like, bratty, edgy teenager. But for some reason, the way it works out, I felt like Suki was a parody of a parody. Like, Suki is a parody of what a parody of a fucking obnoxious weeb would look like. So it's like making fun of the bizarreness of the extremities of her character rather than just her being a character with simple jokes. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's like the impression that I got from it for some reason. And more so, her personality is actually used in contrast with other situations to make more jokes off her personality rather than just telling the same joke over and over again. Like I said, she actually feels chaotic rather than repetitive and on the nose. She's the only character that has really absurd, funny lines that are memorable in any way through just having her character stay true to itself in a variety of situations. And like I said, I have a much clearer picture of her personality. Her line delivery is great. The delivery itself is absurd in a chaotic way. Not in a way that just comes across like something I've heard millions of times before. And Jessie is the only character that actually feels like a character, you know. Granted, a lot of this, obviously, is pulling off of the great characterization that was already set up and in motion from the first game. Like, this is the logical evolution of the character based on how we could already assume she was going to change over a couple of years from the first game, as I talked about before. But yeah, she's still logically sound, nuanced, charming, likable. She's the one character that I think actually works within the context of this story as well, in this setting. She's the only character that I think that forming a relationship with the MC, but around the concept of these stupid double dates, makes any sense. Everyone else is pretty much only interested in sex, or they're a character who feels like them having romantic interest in the MC, but also having threesomes with random strangers at the same time is, like, bizarre and doesn't make sense. No one else feels like the romantic or sexual relationships fit into their characterization in a way that molds well. Like it's a meaningful element of their own personal story. Jessie actually feels like she's making a meaningful connection to the player character. Jessie absolutely feels like a character who would interact with this scenario, who would seek out sex partly just because she likes it and is, not averse to the situation, and she likes the attention from her past semi-fame, and she uses the sex as a distraction because she's somewhat addicted. But she also has meaningful and cute romantic interest in the MC specifically. She is now actively seeking a romantic partner, she just has very lax views on sex. So, she seems like her relationship with the MC is actually special to her, while she still has sex with other characters because it's just something she likes. This doesn't feel like it diminishes her relationship with the MC like it does for every other character. So yeah, Jessie works, Jessie is adorable in this game, and to be fair, her character isn't totally defined just by what was already set in motion with no new ideas. She's one of the characters that actively hits on the other girls she's paired with rather than all being instigated by, I guess, the MC? Just by nature of Jessie feeling more like a real person than almost everyone else, a lot of her dialogue tends to feel more nuanced and like it fits into a complete package of a person. She has ongoing doubts and anxieties about like her smoking and drinking habits and whether those things are affecting her attractiveness and likability. She also feels like less like someone trying to get something like she did in the first game. She feels less manipulative and more like a chill friend who just speaks honestly and casually with the MC, which again, we can see the contrast between this and how she puts on a more confident but more fake persona when hitting on the other characters in the game. I don't think there's as many new ideas for her character in there as there were in the original, but she still works. You know, she makes sense, she feels nuanced, and I think she's more likable in this game than in the first game just because she's less of an asshole, and she's easily the most lovable character in this cast. She's very endearing, in my opinion. That's basically everything I liked in the writing of this game. Actually, I take that back. There's another topic to discuss that I almost forgot that isn't about gameplay, so it's still technically story and character stuff, and that's the sex appeal of the game, or just appeals in general. I think the music in this game slaps, especially the themes that play over the golf course environment. That one sticks out in my mind, especially. But yeah, the music is really enjoyable and made otherwise boring experience much easier to vibe with from time to time. Most people seem to agree. The songs that slap the hardest are the golf course track and the strip clubs track, which also is very unique. Now, the first game had great music too, more memorable and like a chill, classic kind of vibe. All the tracks from the first game are timeless, they feel timeless, but this game has a lot of peppy, hype tracks like this shit. But then there's the sex appeal, which I don't even know what I have to say about it because, like, I've studied writing for a long ass time. I know a fuckload about writing, way more than the average asshole at least. I'm not some sort of expert in sex appeal. I've never considered sex appeal in the creative sense before. I mean, I have, but not academically. Like, fashion, per se. I don't know shit about fashion. I don't know shit about what makes something attractive to the human brain through biology and psychology or culture. A little bit, but not very much. And more importantly, I've never studied sexology as a subject. So, I don't have much to say about it, and I think that'd be the case for most people. I think the game looks good. You know, this game has a different art style from the original, and while this one is more detailed, as it has, like, higher picture quality and less, like, anatomical errors, per se, it's important to note that they are just different. Like the cartoon discussion, one art style is going to inherently provoke a different attitude and point of view than the other, and which is better or worse is hard to narrow down. I will say, I think I like both art styles, and every character has plenty of functional sex appeal in both games. One thing I personally noticed was the cutoff of the character sprites in this game. In the original, the sprites is almost like the complete person, but in the sequel, the screen like cuts off at their thighs usually. This makes the characters visually look closer, higher detail, larger images, but of course it is less of the character being seen. It's also easy to notice that I guess the sheer volume of like the curves per se presented in the second art style are far more extreme and made explicitly for like the sprites to just like spew fucking sex like you would see in a lot of more extreme animes, because there is more appeal to a subtle approach, but it is more like extreme bodies and skin and physics of something like High School of the Dead, for example. Anyways, by nature of all the outfits being much more exposing, and the art style of how the characters visually look, making it obvious that they're drawn for sex appeal, the Huniepop 2 girls generally lack that sort of like attraction through consideration appeal. They're very much the kind of look at the anime titties kind of character designs. And none of this strictly comes down to which is better or worse. I think they are different, and I kind of like both styles. I have misgivings about both of them and like different aspects of both of them. Beyond that, the background art and locations all look really good in this game, and in terms of character designs, I think some of them work really well. Some of them just look too off-balance or stupid to be appealing in a graphic design sense. Like, here's some designs from the characters I think look kind of cool, or otherwise maybe I just grew to like them through pure exposure over time. Now, I can't help but notice that this selection of characters, this roster, doesn't feel as complete as the first game's selection did, in a design sense, and that this is most apparent in each game's title screen. See, in the first game's main menu, you get a straight lineup of the characters wearing what are mostly their default outfits, and it's immediately apparent that in terms of different designs, different body types, heights, color usage, fashion sense, all those sort of things, they all look distinct from each other, but they all fit together very well. They all coordinate with each other's designs well, like they look like the fucking Power Rangers, right? They're all balanced, like the One Piece crew. The old one, not the classic designs. This means that every design works within the consistent theme and balance of the designs. Nothing looks too out of place, they're all striking and diverse, which is just graphic design 101. Now in the second game, the title screen has them all over the place, all wearing totally different outfits, some of which are their default, some of which aren't. I can't help but feel that if you put them all in a lineup, the designs would not mesh well. Many of them would look too similar to each other by nature of all having some of the same skimpy outfit concepts applied to them. Their physical features wouldn't make them look unique from each other very much. Like if you took a lineup of the One Piece crew, it's immediately apparent from the silhouettes and the character designs. Everyone has their own role in the graphic design to fill, and they all look like they belong with symmetry and diversity of concepts. Something like this probably won't affect your playing experience on the game, but I couldn't help but notice it. However, this design simplicity and balance has its own appeal and all, but I would be lying if I said the character designs aren't still very good in Huniepop 2, more specifically the variety. In Huniepop 1, you have different outfits and different hairstyles, and some of the outfits are good, none of the hairstyles really work except for the defaults. Huniepop 2 has way more creativity with its alternate styles, its alternate costume choices. It has some really striking and distinct choices, and just like a ton of creative energy clearly went into making all of the alternate costumes. All that having been addressed, I'm sure many of you who like the sequel and want to defend have been clamoring about the gameplay improvements from the original, and you make a good point. I don't think you're inherently wrong, but I think it's a little more complicated than that. This gameplay, in my experience, runs into a very fascinating problem I've only pinned down a few other times, in other games like Darkest Dungeon, which I'll explain as we go. It's a matter of psychology. But to start with, let's define a few things first. I didn't talk about the gameplay of the original game, because I didn't intend it to be a review. I just wanted to talk about the good writing qualities of the game that many people brushed over, or never knew about, and use it as a vehicle to talk about the genre as well. The gameplay is fun in the original. I like doing it, and it has great capacity for variation. The game has a clear sense of progression as it goes, due to how you gradually collect more and more date gift items, which widens your arsenal of tools you can choose from. You increase the stats of your choice, some of which affect the moves you get to use, like the one that increases the frequency of power and special tokens appearing. But anyways, the fact that there is a progression based entirely on what date gifts you get, and the fact that they are determined randomly as you go, makes it so you have to design your strategy around the tools you randomly happen to get, especially early on, which makes each restart playthrough feel different from start to finish. There's also just a great diversity of ways you can spec your tools to tackle the puzzles. You can completely neglect points-based matches and only focus on generating sentiment, using the gifts that exchange sentiment for a percentage of your necessary score. For example, you have gifts that affect how you plan to get your points, and tools that affect how you keep playing by getting ideal matches or getting more moves, and you can balance your build by prioritizing any of these things more or less. The game will get boring eventually, but it's still really fun for that reason. It's fun to restart from the beginning, because the start feels very different from the end game. It's fun to go for different strats. Those are the most important things to realize about the gameplay of the original. Now, let's talk about the sequel. The gameplay is more complex. That cannot be denied. There is more depth to the systems and strategies that you can employ. Now, the game is largely defined by factors such as stamina, the date gifts you have access to, and the randomly selected baggage factors, at least randomly selected on normal mode. Now, the stamina is pretty easy to explain. You have to balance stamina between the two characters. When you make a match with one, they lose stamina, the other girl recovers stamina in a 1-to-1 ratio, so you're only ever operating with a set total stamina between both characters. If you make matches above the minimum, which is 3 of a kind, then you lose stamina for more matches, or bigger matches. You need special date gifts or to match stamina tokens to recover your total stamina. There's no other way to increase the total. You need to balance what matches you can do with how much stamina you feel comfortable spending, in addition to all the other factors that were already in the first game. This doesn't necessarily add something the first game didn't already have. Like, in the original, you could have a reason to not make a given match of, say, 4 of a kind, because you want to wait until the passion multiplier is higher, or you want to wait until you've applied the gift that gives you more value for 4 of a kind matches through sentiment or moves or something, or the chance for special tokens to be generated, for example. So it's not like the game was brain dead before, in the sense that you would just move and match whatever you saw. But regardless, this stamina system is a new dynamic that adds some things to think about while playing. It also affects one of the other major changes, which is broken heart matches, which now, instead of hurting your total score, they instantly knock out the girl that it's matched for. They dump all of the stamina that they have. In this, a girl can't move if she runs out of stamina and has to wait until she recovers back to 4 stamina blocks before she can move again. If both girls are knocked out at the same time, you fail. You instantly die. So there is now a new fail state in the game that, other than just running out of moves. I think this sucks ass, to be honest. Most of the changes, I think, grant new strategic depth in some way, but this change kind of blows. I had moments playing where I made a match that accidentally triggered 2 3-of-a-kind matches at the same time, thus costing extra stamina, exhausting the girl I did it on, and then the tokens that randomly spawned at the top of the board from the same fucking match then created a broken heart match, and then gave me a fucking game over from a single move out of nowhere. Some of these things that exhaust girls are just bound to happen, or are otherwise literally outside of your control sometimes. However, it makes it easier to enter a date and then fail it as soon as possible to go back to doing other things, which I had to do back when the game first launched and girls didn't recover hunger unless you did a date with them, which they thankfully changed. That's right, you could leave them alone for a week and they'd literally starve themselves and refuse to eat in the meantime unless you dated them. But thankfully, they changed that. But in any case, that thing about the fail states aside, the game is mostly more deep and has the capacity for more thought to be put into every situation on the board, and that is both a good thing and a bad thing, inherently. One quick note now that there is yet another type of token on the board, the stamina tokens. It's not even harder. It's even harder to make matches of the same type of token than in the original. Like, it's automatically making the game at least a little bit more RNG heavy and less in your control, in that you really need the tokens to randomly fall in the right ways to get a lot of good matches going for yourself. I just felt like RNG all over the place while I was playing. Some things would go smoothly, sometimes it would just not give me shit, move after move. It was always a gamble as to whether I'd complete a date or not. I didn't fail very frequently, but certainly more I did than I did in the original game. And when I did, I very clearly failed by huge margins, like getting an unfortunate double exhaust or not getting anywhere even close to the sentiment or the passion or whatever that I needed to get things going. It felt very inconsistent due to this. But anyways, yeah. How can having more to think about puzzles in a puzzle game be both good and bad? Well, this is where psychology comes into play. See, baggage, the new way that date gifts are handled, I think are inherently poor design choices, at least on normal mode. Again, the date gift change is very easy to explain. In the original, every date gift is going to be more or less the same going into it, just a randomized grid. The only real difference is the girls each have their own best and worst types of matches, but all that would really change going into it is if you decided to use the date gifts that increase the frequency of certain token types appearing, or one of the other gifts that only affect one token type at a time. You probably just bring the same gifts into every date in the first game, once you have the ones that you like to use with the strategy that you're going for. But in this game, rather than you holding on to 6 gifts that you bring to every date, instead you give each girl up to 3 gifts that they bring to a date that they are involved with. And then only that girl can use those gifts in the date. On the surface, this isn't that bad in terms of strategy and complexity, but the problem is if you want to use a particular date on a particular girl, or a particular gift on a particular girl, you'd have to first find the girl that still has the gift, de-equip it from her, then go to the girl that you want to give it to. This is a huge pain in the ass to equip and then de-equip every single fucking date. And you do so many dates in this game, so much constant switching between different pairs of girls, that your choice is either to painstakingly always go through every fucking girl, take their gifts away from them, and then use your complete selection to decide exactly what gifts to give to whatever pair you're dating next, only for that date then immediately take it back from them, which happens like literally every 10 minutes or so. You either do that obnoxious shit that obviously no human is going to do consistently, or you just accept that you won't have the gifts that you want because they're still on other girls that you left them on, or you might not have gifts that mesh well with the other girl in the pairings gifts or baggages because it's such a pain in the ass to reslot all the fucking gifts literally every date. This is the main problem with the new complexity. It feels like more of a pain in the ass than it is strategic. It feels less like solving a puzzle and more like doing chores. Like, oh god, new date, new pairing, now I have to trudge my way through these menus again. I gotta see what gifts they have right now, if I want to change anything of them, think about if they all add up to a good cohesive strategy, check the baggage, check whatever it's currently set to be active. You have to double check all these fucking factors constantly, and it feels like you're an accountant, just like running through the numbers in a document to make sure it all lines up. Due to it being harder to find the matches on the board because of the new stamina token, you know, taking up spaces and making it harder to get consistent matches, you feel far more limited in your control of the board without strong gifts that you can actually use consistently. Sure, the strategy could have a lot more depth if I really went out of my way to spend all this time thinking about all the factors that affect this date, I'll do, but like at that point, you'd spend more time checking the constantly and randomly changing factors, and if they require you to make adjustments to your gifts or whatever, or how to use them when you're actually on the date grid, then you'll even spend playing the fucking date. So you either play like that and just die a little inside every date, or instead you do what I did and just give up, just equip all the girls with some generally useful shit that you don't have to think that much about to make them useful, and just stop torturing yourself with the chore of checking everything for each date. You just do them, wing it, you'll probably fuck up and make mistakes here and there, like you didn't check this baggage and you're not allowed to use this gift, or you get punished for doing this because you weren't paying close enough attention and checking everything every single time. But like I said, it feels like doing chores. You're not really doing anything that different between each date and date you start. You're going to be solving pretty similar puzzles to ones you've already solved before. As such, it doesn't feel fulfilling to put all this effort into doing these chores and checking these variables every time. Even if I were to look at the baggage ahead of time, looking at the date gifts, putting all this thought into the plan, you know, it would still just be the same solution to the same puzzle you've already done before at some point. Once you've played the game for a few hours, there aren't really new puzzles to solve, just slight variations of the same puzzle. If you solve puzzle A, then 8 hours from now, here's puzzle A again, the same combination of shit. But you still had to put the same effort both times you solved the same puzzle to think of the same, like, strategies to use. It doesn't feel as rewarding as you keep going. It's not worth it. It's just an annoying pain. And this is on top of the date gift thing where the girls keep giving the gifts, and after a while you just get sick of reslotting them for each date. The problem with this is the game doesn't feel like you're progressing at all in any meaningful way. Like, in the first game, you built up your toolkit over the course of the game, but your tools stay the same. You keep them, so you're constantly adding more and more to your strategy and the way you use your tools, because they stay as part of your build. But in this, you never have the same combination of gifts or baggage, so you don't feel like you're building a start and developing something. It always feels like you're starting from scratch every time. This contributes to the game getting boring way faster than the original. There's a concept that I first noticed while playing Darkest Dungeon years ago, but it's the idea of how much mental effort you need to put into something versus how quickly it becomes boring. It also applies to, say, like, sailing in Wind Waker. Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, once you set sail in the right direction, you can more or less just stop looking at the screen. You can honestly, like, consider it to be just a long loading screen with nice music and stuff, like a chill vibe. There's some things for you to do that will pop up in the ocean, but in terms of mental energy, it doesn't take any brain power for you to do it. As such, it's not even really boring, despite the time sink that it takes to sail. The brain gets bored when it's aware, but unimpressed. If your brain is taking a nap, it's not demanding of stimulation. You know, that's why you can grind in RPGs for stats down the same route for hours without dying of boredom, because your brain is on, like, low energy mode. It's just being fed by the Skinner box. In Darkest Dungeon, a game that I generally do like, I realized after a while that grinding in Darkest Dungeon is way more boring than grinding in just some other turn-based RPGs. This is because you have to think about some things in literally every fight in Darkest Dungeon. Even the fights that aren't really new or interesting in any meaningful way, it's the same shit basically, but you still need to pay attention because you need to make some calculations about how to use your moves against the enemy formation. If your party gets mixed up, you have to change things. Just the nature of the game and how it works means that you need to actually at least be mentally present to play the game in its most basic form. And that, by itself, makes it boring after a while of grinding if you aren't really progressing or tackling new, exciting shit for your mental energy to be worth spending on. The same is true for Huniepop 2. Each date requires too much of your attention from your brain to see all the constantly changing variables and making tactical decisions on the grid or before the date even starts. I can't play Huniepop 2 while listening to a podcast, for example. I just can't do it. As such, once you're no longer very entertained by completing the gameplay, it just gets more and more boring as you can't mentally streamline the process as you go, like you can in, say, Dark Souls, where once your brain has learned the patterns, you can do it while barely paying any attention. You cannot Skinner box it even after you've gotten really good at it and are no longer improving in any meaningful way or solving new puzzles. Now, if you play this game on hard, it actually improves a lot of these situations, because it doesn't randomize the baggage. Instead, all of the baggage that you've unlocked is active all the time, which is way better. Honestly, hard mode also makes losing to bullshit factors in RNG a bit more likely, because you need to get such a big win on the board to make a dent in the progress bar of each date, but some dates will be harder than others due to particular girls, or more frequently for me, bad RNG on what gifts I could even get from the shop each day, especially early on. I needed to get useful gifts to use to fill up the slots I was unlocking, but I wasn't getting anything to fill the new slots. You know, regardless. My second playthrough on hard, I enjoyed more. It was less boring. I still had frustrations and a general sense of slogging through shit over and over, but it was much better at the very least. I tried a third playthrough very recently before writing this, and it's still boring. Like, the fact that you have to get through so many cutscenes with so much, like, completely uninteresting dialogue from uninteresting, flat characters is just, like, exhausting, and the gameplay is still not that engaging. Anyways, that is the problem of progression and psychology in this game. Yes, the strategy is deeper, but it's also way more boring and exhausting to push through after a while of doing it. So is it inherently worse? Well, I played more of Huniepop 1 without getting bored of it, whereas I really don't have a strong desire to play much more of this game, because, like, there's nothing in the writing to simmer over. But, I mean, yeah, it's not bad. I mean, this is good gameplay, I would say. I digress. These are all points made by comparing two games side by side. I don't think Huniepop 2 has that much going for it that could make it a better purchase than the first game. But what about overall? Just as a game. I personally think the game gets pretty boring by the end, even before starting the post-game content. I think it has poorly designed mechanics for a completionist, especially with how the question systems work with learning things about the girls, how you're never guaranteed to get a new question to fill out your compendium. I dislike most of the characters, like, not even apathy, like not caring about them. I actively dislike a lot of them, which is rare for me. But I still like some of the characters and some of the interactions and some of the lines, if few and far between. I think the main game is way too long, and I think it's impossible to not start seeing the girl pairings as like an assembly line that all seem exactly the same as each other. I think a lot of the line delivery is just like not great, and I hate saying that. I hate criticizing voice actors, but like for some reason in my stupid head it feels like worse than, it feels more insulting than say like criticizing a director or a writer, which doesn't make any sense. But I really have to say, it's both the lines themselves and the delivery. Like, I could maybe see a situation in which some of the jokes and some of the lines could play better if they were just voice acted differently. But a lot of the lines sound very unnatural and forced and ham-fisted and cringe, and basically they just don't sound good. I think Jessie and Lola and Suki and some of the others sound good. But, like, I don't think a single word from Ashley's mouth didn't make me physically cringe in the entire game. I actually wanted to go and replay the game without the voices on, and instead use the feature that the first game had, where you can, like, switch the voices with Legend of Zelda or Animal Crossing style beeps and boops. But that feature isn't in this game, unfortunately. The gameplay, under certain conditions, can be really fun, because it is much deeper than, I mean, like, not having voice acting helps the abstraction of it, you know, like, if you're just reading it if you're just reading text, it's easier to sort of, like, suspend your disbelief while reading fucking outrageous or extreme lines. So, that would have been better than having voice acting for most of these fucking lines, but yeah. Anyways, yeah. I like the post-game challenge modes and the endless date modes because there's like more definite challenge to it. And there's no switching out date gifts and shit between every date, which again tells me that you're basically supposed to play this game just leaving girls with generally useful gifts that aren't too likely to be blocked by a girl's baggage at random, and just leaving them with it. In that sense, I got a bit more personality out of the characters just through my established playstyle, but not as much as I would have liked. I mean, I already expected that, but yeah, anyways, it's obviously not efficient to give every girl the same gifts and tools to use. You give one girl a distinct role with her gifts, and then give a different role to a different girl, and then hope that the pairings will allow their roles to mesh well. As such, like, once I beat the game, once I finalized the layouts for every character I wanted and didn't fuck with it anymore, each character felt like they played, most of the characters, or some of them, felt like they played differently from the others because of the layout and the role that I had crafted for them. Like, Polly was like my fucking DPS glass cannon character, for example. All the gifts entirely focused on multiplying and maximizing the value of good matches for late game high passion to blow through the date requirements. And because of that, I naturally ended up liking her more just because of the charming gameplay contribution that she was doing, and the fact that her baggage doesn't make that like difficult to do like some of the other characters, even though technically most of the girls could have been built to play similar roles. But yeah, like, I can pick up and play the game every now and then, do some post-game puzzles. I can't restart the game anymore because it's just like cutscene heavy and it fucking sucks. And it really sucks to play this game without gifts, without a bunch of date gifts, because you just have so little control over the board. But yeah, when you're actually slogging through completing the main game, doing like 40 puzzles back to back with almost nothing in between, and the puzzles are longer in this game than in the original thanks to more systems, more other factors, more moves per puzzle, and you have to sit there and think about a lot of them longer than the first game. I don't recommend bringing it all, binging it at once, like in a single sitting like I did. And to double check my suspicions, like I said, I tried to start a third playthrough, force myself to click through the scenes, semi-paying attention just out of like guilt for skipping the dialogue, and everything was just tedious. The puzzles didn't solve, like they just felt boring. I just felt like more of the same. I think the game is a bit more fun in the post-game, like I said, due to the challenge modes and other modes, and you have more freedom to experiment with like all the date gift combinations and baggage combinations and such, and really start like number crunching to see which options tend to be stronger, which is fun for technical players. Depending on your taste, I think there's a lot of appealing fan service in the game. I think only the character sprites themselves look appealing. Like, you get unique renders after every pairing is completed, and there's a lot of pairings in the game, so a lot of unique photos, CGs, but they almost all look and seem like very similar to each other. Personally, I think they're mostly extremely boring. The art is fine, it's not like low quality or anything, but the CGs just feel like the same thing over and over again. They aren't cool, most of them aren't cool or sexy, they have no personality other than the same, like, suggestiveness. They just kind of exist, I guess. So, I mean, there's definitely worse games you can buy. The game is pretty cheap, too. It has plenty of content for its price point, I will admit, and my main issues with the game are pushed to a sense of hyperbole due to my disappointment with it not being as good as the original, especially in ways that the original was good, which other people probably won't suffer from. But, like, I can't recommend this game as someone who loves good writing and especially loves good dialogue. I can maybe recommend this game in terms of fan service. The game does have a good vibe to it in a casual sense. It's not the same unique casual tone the first game had, but just like in a normal town, there's no real rush or sense of obligation or anything, and it feels like mundane life. But this game still does have a pretty chill vibe to it, but it's more like Super Mario Sunshine in terms of vibe, honestly. And I can maybe recommend it based on gameplay, maybe not, but if you play it, do it on hard. Even if it feels unfair at time, it will feel a bit less chore heavy if you play it on hard. Alrighty, that about wraps it up. See ya.